Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is the Commando Cast, a video cast about all things Star Wars Destiny. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando.
So it has been quite a while since we've had to seriously contend with Mill as an archetype in Star Wars Destiny. Now, Mill was arguably in a tough spot already with the rotation of Legacies block, but for the most part in the ARH era of Destiny, Mill has been essentially non-existent. And this is to the chagrin of a select few and the elation of many, to be sure. But with ARH4 unlikely heroes, Mill is finally back and potentially with a vengeance. While everything is early and we have yet to see where things go in this meta, Mill's prevalence and its relatively strong early performance is something to note, because traditionally Control-esque archetypes take a while to develop. When one is strong early, it in many cases forecasts the future. Now in the last year plus, with Mill being absent for so long, many of us are having to reset ourselves on how to play against Mill, including what can and cannot fundamentally work as a deck design itself. Today, I wanted to talk generally about Mill as an archetype in Destiny, how it wins, where it loses, and why Destiny's fundamental game mechanics make it so difficult to find the right power balance for Mill decks. All right, let's try take number 5 and see if we can actually make it through this one, shall we? So anyway, thanks folks for tuning in. Welcome back to Dice Commando and the Commando Cast. Thank you for joining me today. You guys can probably hear I've got a bit of a cold, so thanks for bearing with that today. It's been a rough week getting here, but hey, it is Destiny Friday, and if we don't do Destiny Friday, what are we doing here, right? The show must go on. So yeah. Today we are talking Mill, and also I hope your week has been going well. Hope your week's been going well, and I hope you're gonna have a great weekend. But yeah, talking Mill today. So yeah, people are pretty polarized on whether they like Mill or not in Star Wars Destiny, and that's completely fair. But the reason I want to talk about today is that understanding Mill in Destiny is important because it helps even if you hate it, then you know how to beat it, right? And, something else I want to get out of the way, for those of you who have been following the channel for a long time, that I won a store championship tournament in Portland, Way of the Force meta. What was that? Probably 2019? Does that sound about right? I don't know. Either way, Way of the Force meta, I brought Yoda, Cassian, and Profitable Connections. And, I brought Mill and I won a store championship with her, right? So I don't throw shade on people who play Mill in a competitive environment, right? I absolutely don't. I honestly believe Mill has its place in most of these type of games, or being collectible card games or whatever it may be. Mill has its place as it keeps a lot of things in check, and it's overall a good thing. One of the problems that Star Wars Destiny has always had is that its fundamental mechanics make it very hard to get Mill right in the game, right? Mill tends to either be completely non-existent, like we've kind of seen for the last, year plus. I don't know exactly, keep a Mill calendar. But you guys know what I'm saying, right? It tends to either be kind of skewed towards you can't really get her done, or it tends to be pretty oppressive. It's very hard to have that middle ground. I would have to say the most balanced Mill meta we ever had, this is just my opinion, but I'd have to say it was the Yoda, Leia, astrogation era after the no answer nerf, obviously, no answer errata, whatever it may be. I think that was a pretty fair Mill meta because, again, there was a lot of checks and balances, and again, they had Ewoks to go after them, which caused some other problems. But they were a dice-based Mill. They still needed their dice to be able to mill you, for the most part, right? I mean, even Leia's power action, you needed a die to do it, right? So that was, I think that was kind of the pinnacle of like balanced Mill. Though I don't know, and I don't even know that was a pinnacle, right? I'm just saying I think that was probably the best example of balanced Mill that we've ever had. And that isn't, I mean, that is my opinion, the Yoda Leia Mill thing, but we've had these conversations before, and I want to harken back to kind of the Wayback Machine, and again, I don't remember exactly when this was. I'll be honest, I searched way more today than I should have to find it. Our buddies at the Hyperloops, our old friend Bobby Sapphire, he actually had an article or a discussion at one time, and again, I looked all over this. Their website's down, actually, I realized, which makes sense. They're not making content anymore, so I support it. I get it. Anyway, point is, he had an article out where at one time he was talking about like maybe, he was basically talking about the fundamental mill advantage in Destiny. And he was kind of arguing that, well, maybe 40 cards is the right move. Maybe you should go to larger deck size or whatever it may be. And again, whether you agreed with him or whether you didn't, I remember there was some waves and conversation on that. But when weren't people fighting with each other in that era of Destiny, right? So we weren't getting any product. What else were we going to do? Anyway, so, but the reason I'm referencing that is he was right on a lot of, whether his solution or not was right. Most of his arguments I agreed with fundamentally. And when you really break down how this game works, right? This is not like a groundbreaking statement. This game in of itself is a game about resolving your dice to further your win con, right? For the most part, the basic fundamentals of this game involve not playing cards that do things, but resolving your dice. And the reason Mill has an inherent advantage in this game is because if you use a card at all, Mill furthers their win condition. Well, Andrew, how's that different than any other game? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, you fill up your hand. Right, in Magic or many other games, you'll draw one card, or you draw a set number of cards, or whatever it may be, and we don't have any sort of recycling or anything like that, right? Furthermore, aside from our 2 resources per turn, we don't have permanent resources in place. We also have to resolve our dice to get said resources to buy us more dice, right? And we all know that one of the best ways to combat Mill is to flood the field with dice, because then they can't remove it. And that's, that in of itself is Mill's advantage, is if you roll out and you don't get what you need, right? It's not as simple as just getting a die in the pool. You also have to get what you need. So kind of to that point, what I want to put up right now is just very simply, here's a graphic I just made in about, 2 minutes of all the die sides in Destiny, right? If we really go down this, when you roll out a die, you generally don't want to see what? The red blank. But if we realistically think about it, when you're playing against Mill, they don't really mind if you get a shield. So a shield is effectively a blank. Disrupt may or may not be, but in many cases they don't necessarily mind if you're using one of your critical dice to take away their money, because that's money they don't have to spend. Now, sure, they'd rather not you do that, but they're still trading a die, right? Discarding them, sure, they don't want to discard, but if you're discarding a die from their hand, usually it's because you're out of options, which means that they've kind of already succeeded, right? You're not going to intentionally, unless it's like some, fluff die or whatever. But my point is, if you're using a valuable character die to discard them, they've succeeded, right? They've turned whatever card you discard into a removal. And sure, it could work in your advantage depending on what it is. And I'm not saying that it's not the right move to do that sometimes. It's not what I'm saying. But even so, they're still furthering their even though it isn't their ideal move, they're still furthering their win con. Even focus, right? And this is going to be one of the more controversial statements, but even focus sides, they don't hate, right? So think about this, right? You have 2 dice that are on something you don't want them to be and a 2 focus. Well, they have 2 options depending on the removal in their hand. One, they can just remove your 2 focus die, which means that you then have to re-roll on the other die, which does then cost you a card, which furthers their win con, right? So they're okay with that. Or let's say they have a 2 die removal or some sort of board sweep or some sort of flipping or whatever. They let you flip your dice, getting your die off the table, and then they remove your other die. Right, so either way, yes, obviously focus is not a bad thing, right? Because you don't have to spend a card to reroll. But a lot of times they don't hate letting you resolve your focus, and they don't hate having a die roll a focus, because it's still a die you have to burn. It's still a resource you have to use, and it doesn't hurt them in the long run, right? And even on, the die-based removal stuff, we can put obviously specials are their own thing, right? And I'd have to say probably only 30% of the specials effectively work against Mill, right? And power actions have kind of changed the game a little bit, but fundamentally too, they don't always hate if you take resources because, they do if you're a support deck or something like that, right? But they don't fundamentally hate if you take resources because again, you're just getting stuff off the board. So anyway, you guys see my point. We can put the die sides away, but the overall point there is that Mill has an inherent advantage there in of itself because you effectively have more blanks than if you were trying to kill someone with damage, right? In a damage race, sure, maybe you don't want to resolve a shield, but a shield still has value. And against Mill, unless you're in those fringe decks where you're throwing shields at them, that die does not have value, right? Does not have value for you, right? That's why Pacify is a fantastic removal card for Mill because they don't care if they give you 2 shields. It does not matter to them, right? It's the same concept there. So anyway, hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying there. And then furthermore, the example that I used early on about Yoda Leia, right? They have to resolve their dice to discard you or to mill from the top of your deck or whatever it may be. So, why don't you just remove their dice? Sure, they'd rather resolve the 2 discard than having you pay 1 and card from hand to remove that 2 discard. But they still furthered their win con. Sure, not to the same extent that they could have, but they still furthered their win con. Right, so hopefully you guys are starting to see what I'm driving for here, and this is essentially what Bobby Sapphire was doing as well. I probably am not saying it as well as he did, or as technical as he did, but fundamentally every action that you take in the game, every action that you as the non-mill player takes, furthers the mill player's win con. Right? If you pitch to reroll, heaven forbid you have to pitch to reroll. In this game, you lose, you further their win con. If you roll out and they remove your dice, they have furthered their win con because now they can do what they need to do. And if you remove their dice, they further their win con. And every turn, you click closer and closer and closer and closer, right? They don't necessarily have to do anything. So, okay, Andrew he's summarized the reason that Mill works in Destiny, right? And that's why it's been so hard, in my opinion, to get the mill balance right, is if it tips too far in, so we kind of talked about that in the intro, right? I said one of the statements I made in the intro was that after Legacies block rotated, Mill already kind of was in a bad spot. And, why? Right, if there were still cards and if there were cards we were using through convert, granted Yoda Leia were both, and okay, so maybe that's it because they were both there, but No Answer was still there, and we had, was it Bale and the old blue guy, whatever his name was, Lorsan, and some of that funky stuff, right? And those decks did things, right? But they were never super top tier. Maybe not. Anyway, but Mill has always been very difficult for them to nail. It's either too good or it's not, right? And that's because of like I've been detailing, like I've been at least trying to detail, is the inherent design of Destiny absolutely favors Mill. So if you have a Mill deck that's just a little bit above curve, even a little bit above curve, it really starts to smack people around. Okay. So, fine. Then you just reel it back. Whatever, right? That's what you're thinking. There's a problem with that, though, in Destiny as a game. And that comes it's a lot of this has to do, obviously, with my personal feeling of Mill's spot in the game. Mill serves as a safety valve for a lot of things that can go wrong in competitive-based play because we as card gamers naturally search for every single advantage we can get, right? All of these games are always an efficiency race to the bottom, right? How efficient can I be? That's why you see the same cards in every deck. That's why we come up with combos that were never meant to be played together, right? We're smart people, and it's an efficiency race. And it becomes this kind of degenerate type. I don't necessarily mean degenerate in a negative sense, but that's, you end up using not the theme stuff, right? Generally, it's the non-themed pair guys. I mean, Cassian and Yoda, like, obviously they worked together that one time, right? On Scarif. I don't know, right? But anyway, you see my point. So, all right, folks, sorry about that. So, okay, so with all that said, great. Been ranting on Mill and its inherent advantage and why Mill is naturally good in Destiny and why it's hard to balance. Super. Let's talk about, well, I mean, I do think that what we're talking about was relevant. We were talking about how Mill wins, why Mill is good, and what makes Mill sing, right? So how do we beat that? I mean, I'm going to summarize basically with one thing, which is early claims. Now, that's not a always hard and fast rule because you don't want to claim and let them just rip your hand. And I mean, you guys get it. But claiming early, right? You have. I mean, we always have to do this, right? You have the card in your hand, and you have to determine what's the value of that card going to be. And there are a lot of battlefields out there now that when you claim, you get something out of them, right? Now, if it's just a resource, maybe that doesn't help you. I don't know, right? But, you know, you have Throne Room out there right now, and like Bo-Katan. So and granted, I lost this game, right? But I played a Mill game on camera, and it's on video. I think it was last week. And in a lot of cases, I'd have 3 dice in the pool, maybe 2 cards in my hand, and I just claim to Throne Room Bo and throw the unblockable out there, right? So that's one thing you can do is don't spend resources unless you know you're going to get something out of it. And that doesn't mean don't ever reroll. I mean, sometimes the chance is just too good that you'll get something that you can use. Or if you know you're going to lose the cards anyway, then fair enough. But and then, you know, so that's one thing, right? Maybe it's not the early claim, but it's don't be afraid of the early claim. That's probably the better way to say it, right? It's not early claim as a strategy, but it's don't be afraid of the early claim, right? Just accept that you're going to leave. I think you do have to accept in playing Mill that you're going to have to leave dice on the table sometimes, right? You're not going to be able to resolve every die like you would normally. And you also need to understand that some of your dice that you may have in your deck, kind of as we talked about earlier with how values are irrelevant, or certain sides, certain symbols are irrelevant, you may have to realize that some dice are just not worth playing. Right? And if your plan is to play it now and then overwrite later, that's another card you spent, right? So sometimes it's just not even worth having the die on the table because then you're just going to kind of be more apt to reroll it. So, you know, do you put a die out there that has a one side on it? I don't know. I mean, it depends on what Mill deck they're playing, I suppose. But yeah. And then the next part is removing their dice. When is it okay to remove their dice? What value are you getting out of it? You know, we have Padme, for example, who if she hits her special, she mills 2 cards, right? So if she has 2 specials, her die is worth 2, effectively, right? And they're going to play enough focus or enough ways to flip it or whatever. Her die is worth 2. Spending 1 card in a resource to get rid of that is 2, but remember that their win con isn't about, right, this isn't necessarily a money race because you're not going to be able to play the same value curve of your dice don't have the same value curve, right? Because your upgrades aren't necessarily as effective. They're not going to necessarily be as effective, right? Look at Bow Staff, for example. Bow Staff is a fantastic upgrade to have out versus Mill, 1/1/2/2 with the shield. But that shield is effectively a blank for you, right? So yeah, don't get me wrong, you'd still love to have that one out. But there are other dice that maybe you don't, right? I mean, even something like the West Star, unless if you can't for whatever reason keep battlefield control, West Star is not necessarily a great one because you can get stuck with the 2 indirect, which doesn't necessarily help you blast down who you need. I mean, damage is damage, but they're also going to be generating shields, which they can take that. So without the ability to blast down who you need, or if you get the +2 out there, you have to have something to pair with it, which actually gives them just a target for removal. So it's not always, right, West Star we know is an incredibly good gun, not slamming it at all, but West Star is not always going to do what you want it to do unless you can get that early claim, but then if you early claim and they take 4 shields, that ping's not gonna help you a ton. So, again, there are no hard and fast rules for playing against mill other than be conservative, right? Other than being conservative. But these type of things throwing out and just kind of, getting our brain in, sometimes we in most games we play, you'll keep pitching to reroll until the end. And like, this is, playing against Mill 101, like, I guess, you guys all know this, but like, sometimes you just leave dice on the table and you have to live with that. So trying to maximize what you can, remembering that the value in your hand, remembering that the cards in your hand have more value, because they do. All right, I'm losing this battle here, and also I'm feeling like this is not one of the better casts I've ever shot. So the point here, the takeaway here is this, right? You have to be conservative when you're playing mill. And every decision you make, when you're making these decisions, it has to change where you put your value, right? We make all these trades of like card from hand plus resource equals removal, right? We do all that math in our head, but it's not the same when you're playing mill. And you have to start thinking in terms of card quantity instead of resource quantity, right? I mean, we do, when we're playing this game generally, we equate, in a normal Destiny game, like playing real Destiny, right? You equate the card from hand as one resource. One die is, a die value on a die as being one value, a resource, depending on what point in the game. It slides a little bit, but we base everything on resources. And when you're playing against mill, you have to count cards as value, not necessarily resources, right? So that's one trick that helps me a little, and to be honest, has helped me more when I'm playing mill, right? I mean, that's, start thinking in terms, I was. When I won that Sword Championship and when I've played mill since, thinking about things in terms of card value instead of monetary value really does help you kind of shift that mindset. All right, so before we get out of here, one last thing. I know that, again, that mill is always a hot topic and an emotional topic and all that, blah, blah. But, I think one of the reasons that mill feels so bad to certain people in Star Wars Destiny, and to be honest, I'm not a fan of it in Star Wars Destiny, but like I've said, I think it has a place. But I think one of the reasons it feels so bad is because mill, as the very definition of mill, you're the blue player in Magic, right? You are. Your job is to not let your opponent do what they want to do. And Destiny is a very different game in that who would attract, largely in who had attracted to come play it, right? People who wanted to come play this game wanted to play their favorite characters. They wanted to equip them with lightsabers and stuff. And if they're sitting down against somebody who all they do they're not trying to kill you, they're just trying to disrupt what you're trying to do, it can be very frustrating for people, and that's completely understandable, right? So it's a completely reasonable stance on why people would not like mill in Star Wars Destiny, particularly compared to how a mill may be viewed in other games. So that's just something I would like for people to keep in the back of their mind as well, when they're deciding what to bring. But, to a casual type event, right? Again, I'm not going to throw shade on anybody for bringing mill to a competitive level event. But, know your audience, right? That's important. So anyway, that'll do it for me today. Like I said, I felt like some of the ranting in the middle was not necessarily one of my best casts, but thanks for joining me anyway. If you did make it this far at all. So anyway, folks, thanks for joining me. Let me know what you guys are thinking. Some other tips for playing mill aside from burn decks, which are another problem of this game, but we'll deal with one problem at a time. So anyway, folks, thanks for joining me, and go Commando.